Now? Okay. Hi, everybody. Greetings to you all. And my name is Eimear Burke, and I'm coming to you from Kilkenny in Ireland. And it's now dark and cold. As you can see, I'm wrapped up in a shawl. So let me start a story. So this story is actually, normally I tell Irish stories, but this is an Indabella story from Zimbabwe. But I think it's a story that's relevant for these days in which we live. Once upon a time, there was a young, handsome man, and he had just gotten married to the most beautiful woman he had ever met. He was so in love with her. And every day he'd go out and he'd make sure he collected some nice treat for her, a small gift or extra vegetables or some nice meat when he'd been hunting. He was so in love with her. Now, as much as all he could to impress her, he wanted to impress her even more. Now, his wife had a brother who was married and lived at the other side of the village. Now, his brother was blind, and he wanted to support his wife and impress her even more, and he offered to take his brother-in-law hunting. And the blind man said, "Well, I can't see. I only know my way around the village, but if you're happy to take me into the forest and I can hold on to your elbow, then I'll go hunting." So they arranged to meet the next morning at the edge of the forest. And the blind man, he knew his way around his village. He knew when he left his door, kissing his wife goodbye, he was able to go out and he knew when to turn right and when to turn left, what rock to avoid, what tree stump to be able to go around until he came to the edge of the forest. This was one big mystery because he'd never been there before. And there his young brother-in-law, the sighted one, was there waiting for him. So the blind man took the elbow of his sighted brother-in-law and entered into the forest. Well, a whole wonderland opened up to this blind man. He could feel the crackling of the leaves beneath his feet. He could smell the magic of the trees. He could smell the green, the leaves, and he could hear the insects buzzing. And he could hear the song of the trees. The song of the trees themselves, and also as the wind rustled through the leaves. And he was just full of joy, and he could feel the sky energy coming down from the top right down into his head. And he could feel the pulsating energy of the earth coming up through his feet. What a joy to be in this place. And as they walked along the path, he said to his sighted brother-in-law, "Oh, I can hear a mother bird. She's feeding some worms to her babies in the nest. And there's a fox running through the brush. Ah, and there is a mouse just waking up." And the young man said, "How can you know all this when you cannot see?" And the blind man said, "Can't you hear it? I can hear them. Ah, and there's a bird just about to take flight." And the young man was amazed at how his brother-in-law, who couldn't see anything, could know so much and sense so much. And the blind man say, "I see it with my inner eye, and I listen with all of my senses. This is a most magical place you've taken me to." And of course, the young man couldn't hear what his brother-in-law could hear. He was so focused, following the path to find the ideal place to lay their traps. And eventually they came to a good place beside a stream where they could lay their traps to catch some birds. And the young man taught his blind brother-in-law how to set a trap to catch a bird. And the blind man did it. And then the young man went further upstream and he set his trap. This time he remembered to disguise the trap so the birds wouldn't recognize it. And he realized he'd forgotten to show his blind brother-in-law how to disguise his trap. But then he was in such a hurry to get home to his beautiful wife. He couldn't stop thinking about her, and he thought, it doesn't matter. He's not going to see. He won't know any better. And he didn't say anything to the blind man. And he said, "Come on, It's time to head home. And they walked back along the path with the blind man holding onto the elbow of the younger man. And he's just experiencing still the joy and the magic and the wonder of being in that natural place. And when they came to the edge of the forest, they arranged to meet the next morning at the edge. And the blind man said goodbye to the young man, and he headed way back to his own house because he knew the way in the village. And the young man went back to his wife and was so glad to be reunited with her. Anyway, the very next day, the blind man said goodbye to his wife and headed out his door, and he knew when to turn left and when to turn right and which tree stump to avoid and which boulder to avoid until he came to the edge of the forest. And there was his young brother-in-law waiting for him. And they greeted each other. And again, the blind man took the young man by the elbow and they entered into the forest. And yet again, the blind man experienced the magic of this forest and the smells and the textures and the beautiful sounds. And the sounds had colors for him, even though he was blind. What a wonderful place to be in. And they walked and they walked. And each time the blind man would say, there are some insects buzzing over there. Oh, there's something flying over here. And there's some little creature running down there. I hear an animal cracking a nut. And again, the young man, amazed at how much this blind man knew. And as they were getting closer to where they'd been the day before, he said, we've caught 2 birds. Each one of us has a bird in our trap. And the young man said, how can you know that? The blind man said, can't you hear? Anyway, they arrived at the blind man's nest or trap. And sure enough, there was a bird. And then he went to look at his own one. And yes, sure enough, there was a bird. He took away the disguise and what was inside his trap? Only a little brown bird. And yet he'd seen in the trap of his brother-in-law a beautiful coloured bird, all the colours of the rainbow. He began to get envious. Why should that blind man get such a beautiful bird when he won't know any different? And he was thinking, my wife would love to make a hat out of those beautiful coloured bird feathers. So what did he do? He picked up the little brown bird from his own trap, brought it over to his blind brother-in-law, says, yes, here's your bird. And the blind man accepted the bird and he began to rub its head and stroke its feathers and down its wings. And the young man said, you can keep it, put that now in your hunting bag. And that the blind man did. And the young man took the colourful bird, put it in his bag. And they picked up their traps. And they headed back, walking along the path. And when they were halfway through the forest, they decided to take a rest. And they sat down on a log. And they were silent for a time. And the blind man said, turning to the young man, he said, you have a question, don't you? There's something troubling you. And the young man, amazed, how could this blind man know this? He can't even see my face. And the young man said, can you tell me, what is it that causes friends to fall out and to hate each other? And the blind man was quiet for a while. And then he turned to look at the young man and looked at him directly into his eyes, as if he could see into his very soul. And he said, people fall out, become enemies, when they do to each other what you have just done to me. And with that, the young man was so embarrassed. He coloured up And he knew he had done wrong to his brother-in-law. And he said, "You're right, and I am so, so sorry. It's just that I saw those beautiful feathers on that bird, and I knew my wife would be so happy and she could make a beautiful hat with those feathers, and I wanted to please her because I love her so much. And I admit, because you were blind, I didn't think you'd notice. I didn't think or consider for a moment that your wife might like to make a hat out of those beautiful feathers. I have wronged you, and I am so, so sorry." And with that, he put his hand into his hunting bag and took out the beautifully coloured bird, and he handed it to his blind brother-in-law. The blind man took the bird and he stroked its head and rubbed his hands around its back and its wings, and he said, "Thank you." And he put the colourful bird in his bag, and he took out the little brown bird and handed it to the young man, who put it in his bag. And then they sat there for a few more moments, quietly. And then the blind man said to him, looking at him directly, he said, "You have another question, don't you?" I suppose the young man could no longer be surprised at the wisdom of his blind brother-in-law, and he said, "Indeed I do." He said, "Tell me, how can people become friends again after they have been enemies and fallen out?" And the blind man thought for a few moments, and then again, once more, looked the young man directly in the eye as if he could see into his soul, and he said, "People can become friends after they've been enemies when they do what you have just done to me." And that is the end of my story. So, I have another story. Many, many years ago, when the animals had their annual race, they would gather, and the winner was always Shunnock the fox. He was the greatest champion of all the athletes, and he was very, very arrogant and very, very nasty as a result. And he made fun of all the other animals who couldn't run as fast as he could, who weren't as graceful and elegant, because he loved to feel the wind in his fur and out of the side of his eyes see his tail with the white top moving back and forth, feeling the wind in his ears, sniffing the cold air as he ran and ran and ran and won every race. And he would sneer and jeer at the other animals, particularly the one animal he loved to bully was Allah, the swan. He would laugh at her as she would waddle on the race. And of course, so many times she was so awkward that she mightn't even finish the race. Then one day, Girya, the hare. Now, Girya was a very, very wise hare, and it was she who organized the races every year. And this particular year, she announced that her favorite to win this race was Allah. Well, everybody laughed. They all knew how awkward and clumsy Allah was, that she'd waddle along the ground. And people thought it was a joke, a very poor one at that. But big-headed Shunnock got really angry at this and ridiculed Allah even more. "Who do you think you are that you could be the favourite of this race when I have been the reigning champion for years and years and years?" Poor Allah was so, so upset and didn't even want to take part in the race. But Girya, being a wise hare, persuaded her to take part. She said, "Trust me, this year it'll be different." So they all gathered at the bottom of a hill, which was usually the starting point for the race. But this time, Girya said, we are going to turn around, and the race is we are going to get to the top of the hill. And that's the starting point. And Sherlock laughed. He said, do you think Allah's going to get up that hill? I'm certainly going to win again. Geary said, you all have to get to the top of the hill, and that is where we will start the race. So the animals started to climb up the hill with Sherlock. Well, he decided to take his time because he knew he was going to get there first anyway. Alice struggled, and she huffed and she puffed and she waddled this way and that way. And eventually all the animals got to the top of the hill. And what was before them? Only a large lake. And they were all about to turn around and race down the hill when Geary said, no, this year the race is going to be who can get to the other side of the lake the fastest. So they were all lined up to swim across that lake. And Geary said, ready, steady, go. And they were off. And Allah, in her own element, looking as elegant as she could with her long, graceful neck. And there she was, apparently just gliding, paddling like mad underneath. And she swam and swam as fast and as gracefully across that lake. And of course, she got there first, where poor Sherlock was like little paws just going this way, struggling. And his beautiful red fur no longer sleek and elegant, but wet and matted. And his old tail, that beautiful tail that once moved, now drooping. And he was puffing and puffing and puffing. And eventually, he got out on the other side of the lake. And Geary had pronounced Allah the winner. And everybody cheered for her win. And Allah turned to look at Sherlock in her victory as she saw him bedraggled, brought down by his loss, hanging his head in shame. And she looked at him, and she remembered all those years where he had laughed and ridiculed her, humiliated her, hurt her so much. And she thought, I think I could give him a bit of his own medicine. I now have the power to humiliate him. I could do this if I wanted. But she decided, no, I won't. And she looked at him and looked at him directly in his two eyes and said, you have treated me badly, but I am happy to teach you how to swim. And that is what she did. She being the bigger person. She was a happy person that day, or a happy swan, should I say, but also Geary, because she had found a clever way to bring Sherlock down a peg or two. And nobody ever laughed at Allah again. Shinny. I wads a Chanamshire, it's a cheer show in Aaron. Bhí Taoiseach darabanam dahi. Agus bhí sé an granwer, ach bhí an rud sin co-ach. Let me translate. A long time ago in ancient times in Ireland, there was a Taoiseach. Now, in modern times, the Taoiseach is the name we give to our Prime Minister, but what it really means is the chief. And his name was Dahi. And he was very funny. Now, this was strange. Nobody ever took him seriously, no matter how hard he tried. None of his people would do as he asked them. They would never obey him. Now, he was a very laid-back Taoiseach, and he didn't like to offend anybody. So he preferred to be funny. Now, his people liked him, but they had no respect for him, really, or for his authority. And try as hard as he could, he just could not get them to do what he wanted. So he consulted his wise druid, Coffa, the wisest druid in all of Ireland. Now, Coffa had bruchtaí agus orathe, he had spells and incantations. He had potions. And he could raise ceodriachta, he could raise magical mists. He could create wild winds. And he could make forests disappear and appear somewhere else. Such was the power of his driacht, the power of his magic. So Dahi said, please find a brucht or a potion or an ura, an incantation that can get my people to obey me. But for all Coffa's driacht, for all his magic, and no matter how hard he tried, nothing worked. None of the bruchta worked. None of the ura worked. The people still couldn't take Dahi seriously. Then one day, there was a young bondaree called Kira, a young woman. She was passing by the village and she'd heard about the problem that Dahi the Taoiseach had. And she went up to him and said, I have a solution for your problem, if you're willing to listen. He said, indeed I am, because he was very, very desperate. And she wrote on 2 parchments and she handed them and said, I have 2 bruchta spells written on these parchments. And if you use these 2 bruchti, these spells, and use them wisely, these will ensure that people will respect you and will be loyal to you for the rest of their lives. Fascinated, he took the 2 parchments and he read the bruchta, he read the spells over and over and over again and practiced them in his mind. And he was in the great hall surrounded by his followers when Taig, a servant, came by carrying a big haunch of venison in his arms. And he called over and he said, Let the Helahaig, Gullini Sancho go veki me an fiol seo. Please, Taig, come here till I have a look at that venison you're carrying. What Kira had said beforehand when she handed him the 2 spells was, use the first spell before you want them to do something, and use the second spell after they've done as you asked. And if you find that they're smiling, that'll indicate to you that they respect your authority and will be loyal to you. And this is what everybody noticed. After Dahi had said, Let the Helgolinis and Shahaig, please Taig, come here, he had a smile on his face. Taig himself was amazed, because never ever had he heard Dahi ever say please before. And of course it put a smile on his face. So he went over to Dahi, who looked at the meat and said, Guramaga Dahaig, Tag Hadagot Imukt. Thank you, Taig, you may now go. And Taig went off carrying the venison and he was beaming. Wow, I got to thank you. And from that day on, he remained loyal to Dahi. Now, the people who were gathered were amazed at the power of these 2 spells. And Dahi was so impressed. He lavished lots of riches upon Kira in thanks to her. And she was about to set off on her way when Coffa, the wise druid, called to her, and he said, I am so impressed with a young woman like you, with all your youth, your driacht, your magic. How was it? Where did you learn this magic? And would you share it with me? Now, Kira was a She was not only intelligent, she was very wise, but she was also honest. And she told him the truth. She said, there is no driocht. There is no magic in those 2 parchments that I gave. Your Taoiseach. I learnt my driocht from a wise bondry, a wise druidess, when I was training, who lives in the forest. And she taught me about the magic of politeness and good manners and gratitude. And she taught me that most people, that's all they need to get people to do things. That's all that people need to hear, is those focal driachta, those magic words. Please and thank you. And Kaffa listened to her and thought, wow, it's so simple and so obvious. I'd never thought of it before. And he thanked the wise woman for sharing her knowledge with him. And off she went on her way through the forest. Well, that night, Kaffa went back to his chambers and he threw out all his bruchti, all his arhe, all his potions. And he set about writing a book on good manners so that he could continue to advise and guide Dahi the Taoiseach to be the best Taoiseach he could be. Shine Mashkelsa. Do I have time for another story? Yep. Okay. This is called Dush and Chivan, the fairy woman's gift. I heard Liz Weir tell a version of this, and this is my own version. Once there were 2 little girls. One, her name was Evie, and the other, and she was the most beautiful little girl. Everybody loved Evie. She had golden curls and deep blue eyes and a very, very happy disposition. And she was also a very good little girl. And she was kind and helpful and had a very easy way about her. And when her mum and dad would say, now Evie, it's time to go to bed. You have 5 minutes to tidy up your toys. She'd go and tidy up the toys, and then she'd get ready for bed and get into her pajamas, and she'd brush her teeth and jump into bed, waiting for a bedtime story. And in the morning, when they'd come to wake her up, she'd hop out of bed. She'd get dressed and go downstairs for her breakfast, and then she'd head off to school. Now, Evie's best friend was Moira Rua. She was a very different little one. Now, she was a delight, she was great fun, and she was very, very spirited. But because she was so spirited, well, she wasn't very patient. And she was always negotiating for another deal. So when bedtime would come and her mum and dad would say, now, Moira, you have 5 minutes to tidy up your toys, it's bedtime. No, give me another 5 minutes. I just need to finish what I'm doing now. I can't go now. And she'd negotiate and negotiate and negotiate, and it would always end up going to bed much later than her parents had said. And then when they'd call her in the morning, no, I don't want to get up. I'm so tired. I don't want to go to school. But despite the 2 girls being so different, they were the best of friends. Now, often they'd get into trouble. Well, Moira Rua loved a bit of mischief, and Evie would often get blamed because of her association with Moira Rua. But they weren't bad girls. They were just up for fun. And Moira Rua, well, she'd kind of leave Evie on. Anyway, the favourite day of the week was Saturdays, because that was when there was no school and they had all the freedom in the world. Now, one particular Saturday, the girls set off roaming through the fields, and it was a lovely sunny day, and they were trotting through the woods when suddenly they came by accident by what is known as a fianeva, a sacred grove. And there were hawthorn trees, and these are the trees of the Sidhe. These are magical trees growing in this fianeva. And the girls went in and they were looking around and they were exploring. And suddenly, Evie smelled something. It was like the smell of roses, but she looked around. She couldn't see any. There were no flowers there at all. And then she could hear this beautiful music, like a magical tinkling sound that she'd never heard before. And it was then that she realized where they were. Oh my goodness, Moira, do you know where we are? We shouldn't be in this place. We are in a Fianeva. This is a sacred place, sacred to the Ace She. Some people know them as good people, the shining people, or the fairy folk. Well, I like it here, said Moira. Well, I think it's okay to be here, says Evie, but we must leave a gift. You must never enter a fairy ring without leaving a douche, a gift. But I've nothing to give. My pockets are empty. Have you anything? Replied Moira. Well, said Evie, yes, I do. I have my voice. And so have you. Let's both sing. And let that be our douche, our gift to the Ace She in this place. And so they began to sing. And they had two very, very fine voices. Lovely, lovely, sweet voices. And they sang some magical love songs. And sitting there, sometimes with their eyes opened and sometimes with their eyes closed, they sang away to each other and to the Ace She. And when they'd finished singing, who should appear before them? Only a she-van, a fairy woman, a woman of the Ace She. And there she was with long golden hair, green eyes and long flowing green robes, the colour of the trees, and lips as red as hawberries, and skin as white as the blossom of the hawthorn blossom. She held a staff in her hand. Now they were rather startled at first. Oh, she said, don't be frightened, little girls. What beautiful songs you were singing. They were the most beautiful, magical songs I've heard in this place. And you two are humans. Well, said Evie, we know we should never enter a Fianeva without giving a gift, leaving a douche. That indeed is true, said the she-van. It's so wonderful to hear your beautiful voices. Now let me sing for you. So she sang a song for them, a magical song. And then, when she was finished, she said, you know what? Time is strange in these places. Do you realize it's getting very late? And of course the two little ones hadn't noticed, because time does seem to stand still in these sacred groves, in these magical places. You'd better run home to your parents now. You know, I like to keep a watch over you and your families. And I know your parents, they work very hard and they like to honour the land. So I'm going to give you both a douche on condition that you do not open it. And you do not look inside it until you get home. And she gave each of them what looked like two little magical bags with a drawstring. Sometimes the bag seemed to be made of leaves of green, and other times it appeared to be made of green silk. And sometimes it looked like something else. So the two girls thanked the she-van very much for her gifts, her douche. Now she said, remember what I said, don't even peep inside those bags. And saying goodbye to the she-van, the girls began to make their way home through the fields. And when they were nearly home, Moira Rua just couldn't contain her excitement. I can't wait, she said. Why is she telling us we have to wait till we get home? Why can't I just take a little peek inside the bag? What difference will it make? Evie said, no, no, no. She said we mustn't look inside until we get home. These gifts are for us to share with our families. Oh, nonsense, nonsense, says Moira Rua. Why are you always so good? I just can't wait. It's driving me crazy. I'm dying to see what's inside. But it looks like nothing because the bag is flat. No, the she-van said we mustn't open them. Just one little peek. I'm just going to open the drawstring a little bit. I'm not even going to open it up properly. Just one little peek won't do any harm. So she took a little peek through a tiny opening but it was all dark. She couldn't see anything. So she couldn't contain her curiosity. So she opened up the bag a little bit further. It was still dark as she looked inside. Then she had to look another bit and opened it up another bit until it was completely open. And she looked inside. Everything was dark, and she said, it's empty. And she turned it upside down to shake it, and all that came out was just dark soil. I knew it. The Shivan tricked us. This is so unfair. After all, we have given her a song. Let's see if she's tricked you too. No. No, I'm taking this home to my family, just like the Shivan said. Anyway, they arrived at Moirarua's house first. They said goodbye and they said they'd meet the next day at school. Evie continued home, skipping along and singing her song, and then she rushed into the house and told her family all about what had happened and about meeting the Shivan and getting the douche. And she said, we were told never, not to open the bags, but Moira couldn't wait, and she did, and there was only dark soil that fell out of the bag, and she felt that the Shivan had tricked her. Oh, that was a fear douche, said her mother. That was no trick. That was a real gift. What do you mean? Well, a douche can mean a gift or reward, but it can also mean distress and sorrow. And that was what Moira Rua got because she couldn't wait. Well, let's look in your bag and see what you got. And she opened the bag, and to everyone's amazement, gold and silver coins fell out of the bag. The thing about this bag is that it has to be shared with all of my family, said Evie. Well, this indeed is a gift. This will help to pay your school fees and pay all of our bills. And so they counted out the money, and then they put it aside for all the bills to be paid, and kept just a tiny bit to have a treat. And you know, when they had spent all the money on their bills and paying their debts, didn't the bag fill up again? And that was the bag that was never empty, and they prospered. Now, Evie, when she could, she'd often give the odd coin to Moira Rua because she was a kind girl. A douche is a gift, and it's also a sorrow. So it is important to remember when you receive a douche to treat it wisely and listen to how it's given. Shine mushkelza. So I think that comes to an end, isn't it?
That is about the moment. Your timing is
Mm.
absolutely perfect, amazing and wonderful. And it was lovely to see you and hear you.
After all this time, John.
Yes, we haven't seen each other for weeks, darling, weeks.
Absolutely. There's
And
Norman and Lisa as well. That's
good
brilliant.
to see, cute Sir Mr. President King Louis, Tim, Lindsay, Tim Enns, marvelous, and Lisa, who I haven't seen for at least 2 weeks, and
Oh,
Norman.
who I thought I'd left in Toronto somewhere, put him on a plane safely. Obviously got an Omar, fantastic.
Yes.
Keeping the cafe, Omar and Waleed keeping the cafe warm for us for when we return.
Very good. I can't
Marvelous.
wait. Yeah.
Yes.
Wonderful.
So yes, we're yes. So what we got coming? Hello. Oh, there's the Sir Waleed himself.
hello.
The pilot of the magic carpet. So what we got coming? Oh, Sunday. Sunday is our worldwide story round. So pop along and tell a story. So if you're around on Sunday, Omar, tell a story on Mike's story round.
I'd love
As
to,
Mike
but
Russ.
I've got my Imulk ceremony on Sunday, so
Oh well.
unfortunately I
Then
can't.
you're a bit busy.
Yes, I am. I'm not complaining
Yes.
though.
Well, it's every couple of weeks anyway. So,
Brilliant.
Lisa, pop along and tell a story if you want.
Yeah, we're doing.
So that's Sunday at 6 o'clock, and next Friday we got Michael Kerrins all the way from Scotland.
Oh, lovely.
So we'll keep the Marrakesh is staying together, but virtually.
Yes.
But Waleed, could you send some weather over? It's very cold here.
Yes.
We'd like a little Moroccan weather, please. Yes. You know, if you could arrange well, it's like going up the stairs in the cafe, but just across a bit of water.
Yeah.
So it can be done. Anyway, lovely to see you all, and we'll see you on Sunday. Or
Okay.
Thank
some of us
you,
on
Ema.
Sunday. Those that haven't got ceremonies.
Right.
Lovely. And thanks
Wonderful.
for one more round of applause. I join in, but I dropped my computer if I did so, which I'm holding on my lap. So
Thank you very much.
one more round of applause from Eimear Burke, who was amazing.
Thank you, Ema. Woo-hoo.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay. Slán.
Sorry I missed most of the stories, but I'll
Eimear,
listen to them.
Okay. Slán go fóill.
Bye.
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 Bye.